I'm very pleased to be here for the second edition of 7 Minutes With. I'm Jared from Dune 7, and my guest today is none other than Henry Harteveldt. Henry doesn't need much of an intro, I don't think. However, I will give him a brief intro here. So Henry is the preeminent travel industry thought leader. He is the founder of Atmosphere Research Group. They're a boutique research and advisory firm that serves the global travel industry. His clients include airlines, GDSs, venture capital firms, financial services firms, technology partners. Is there anyone I've missed, Henry?
We work with the lodging industry, marketing agencies. Yeah, I think you caught it all.
Great. So yeah, thanks for joining today, Henry. Really pleased to see you on the other coast. And yeah, glad that you're here.
Well, I appreciate being included. Thanks, Jared.
So let's get into it. The first area I wanted to talk about was just enforcement of all of the pandemic era rules that now I think a lot of the flight attendants and to a lesser extent pilots are finding themselves in the front lines. And we've all seen the news, and it's horrible, it's disgusting, the behavior that some airline passengers have exhibited. So what I'm curious in is, where do you stand on your thinking behind, should flight attendants be on the front lines, or have governments, both US and foreign, not provided them with the regulatory framework, if you will, to allow them to do their jobs easier?
Well, I think this is a good place to start. Flight attendants have no choice but to be on the front line. Unfortunately, they are the airline's representatives in the cabin with us as passengers on the flight. But I'm a big advocate for the government mandating the mask requirement. Without the government's law, without the ability to enforce and potentially prosecute people for failing to wear the masks, if it's an airline-only policy, flight attendants and other airline employees, whether it's a pilot or an airport worker, if the incident should take place at the airport, have less weight, less clout behind them. But if someone's not wearing the mask at the airport or on the plane, and the employee says, look, this is a federal requirement, you have two choices: you comply or you don't fly. Three options, really. You comply or you don't fly. The third option is you can be fined. Again, if people understand this is a federal requirement, it is law, more than likely they will comply. And so I think that it's essential that as long as we are going to have a requirement to wear masks on planes, and we are recording this interview right after the government announced it was extending the requirement to wear masks in airports and on planes through March 2022. The government has to do that. They need to do that so that the airline employees can literally say it's a federal government policy. It's not an airline policy. It's not arbitrary, because I do think it ends up with more compliance. Now, we know it doesn't stop all the unruly behavior, but hopefully it reduces it. And I will say this week, I had to go to Charlotte, North Carolina for a business meeting. There was no drama on my 4 flights. I happened to take Delta Airlines between San Francisco and Salt Lake, Charlotte, Minneapolis, and Minneapolis back to San Francisco. And only on one flight from Charlotte to Minneapolis did the flight attendants have to make a reminder announcement in flight to wear your mask.
Which is,
I think most people
par for the course these days. So
yeah, but the announcements are good. And I fly all airlines, and I haven't been on flights that have had people intentionally not wearing masks.
Right.
Sometimes people forget.
Sure. Of course, just like you do when you walk into a building and you say, oh, whoops, where's my mask? Sure.
Right. And the flight attendants, have all been generally pretty good about it. Oh, would you mind putting the mask back on? Or reminding people to wear it over your nose and mouth, which again, sometimes it slips, whatever.
Do you think it's ever? Yeah, I mean, I think that's very level-headed and insightful. And do you think this gets to the point where we're both old enough to remember when it used to be able to smoke on airlines? I'm old enough too, yes. And I don't remember the changeover and sort of the process that people went through, that smokers went through, to all of a sudden make that shift in their mind, like, oh, I'm no longer able to light this right now. Is that what we're looking at right now? Is this, I mean, because obviously COVID isn't going away. Is this going to be that type of a mind shift?
No, I think it's a little different because the other thing is with smoking, there's the physiological effects that not being able to smoke if you're a smoker has on you, especially if you haven't been able to smoke for several hours.
Right.
I do think that what will, what is happening though is people now understand that at least this is the now of flying. The now of flying means that you have to wear a mask the second you enter the terminal and keep it on you, except if you're actively eating or drinking, for the duration of the time you're in the terminal, boarding and disembarking your flight and aboard the airplane.
Yep.
You step out of the terminal, you can rip the mask off. If you can, you can tear it into 10,000 pieces. Nobody cares. But, I also hope that this won't be necessary for too much longer. One, because we get our hands around this virus and its variants. The airlines have said that the air on the airplane is very clean. And airline passengers do tend to be more likely to be vaccinated and to be boosted than the general population. There, as we are conducting.
Is that true? Have you seen studies that show that actually?
We have actually done the studies, although we haven't gotten the data back from our most recent study. But when we did it the last time, airline passengers were at least 10 points above the national average for having been fully vaccinated.
Interesting. Is that international? Did you? Now
this is a U.S. study. This was a
U.S. Okay, interesting. Great.
Right. But if I may, this was also before boosters were available.
Okay.
But what I will add is that with Omicron now and the potential for other variants, we don't know when this mask requirement will actually end. And one of the things we're going to have to live with is the fact that even if mask requirements do end, they could come back.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Great. All right, let's switch gears off of COVID for a minute, although we might have to revisit it. Alex Cruz, who you might know, who is the former CEO at BA, at a recent Kappa event, had some choice words, I'll say, for the airline industry from a technology perspective and just the rate of adoption of change and innovation. So I guess, what is your view when it comes to things like reservation tech, NDC, and digital retailing? Where do airlines stand? Do you think that it's at the point finally now where the airlines have to basically just rebuild their whole tech stack from scratch, or are these band-aids that they seem to be placing on these fairly legacy systems, is that good enough?
Well, let's put it this way. I think it's ironic for Alex Cruz to criticize the airline industry technology, considering that he didn't like to spend money on technology at BA or at any of the IAG carriers.
Right.
But his point is valid, and he's not the only airline executive who has said some of these systems are no longer suitable. Look, the systems go back to a time they were introduced when Lyndon Johnson was president of the United States. Now, they have been updated. They are more capable than they were. But technology has also advanced greatly. And I wrote about in a report back in 2016 for IATA on the future of distribution that the potential will exist. It may not have happened in the 5-year timeline between 2016 and 2021, but it does exist for airlines to cobble together, if you will, to build their own reservation system using components from different companies. Those companies could be traditional airline technology providers like Amadeus and Sabre. They could be general tech companies, for example, IBM. They could be newer generation technology companies like Google. They could be specialist or retailing systems, Shopify, for example, or others. But airlines are not standing still. Lufthansa Group was the pioneer in creating what's known as continuous pricing. And for those of you not from the airline industry listening, you may know that airlines manage the revenue on flights by assigning fares within a bucket. There are 26 buckets that align with 26 different letters in the Western alphabet. Continuous pricing says, no, we don't need that. we're going to let the airlines set the price without the needs of these defined fare buckets or inventory codes. So we can price a fare literally from a penny to a bazillion dollars
Right.
at whatever increments we want based on the demand. And then incorporate, is it just the base fare, if you will, the seat and the seatbelt? Does it include a checked bag? What boarding priority do you get? Does it include a meal or anything on the airplane, priority security, whatever it is that the passenger wants, can afford, and is able to pay for it. So yes, there is a lot of improvement being made. And you know what? I want to give credit to the folks at Amadeus and Sabre. It's not like they're sitting around doing nothing.
Sure.
But at the same time, if they don't do enough, and that's the key thing, they're not doing nothing, but are they doing enough to keep their systems relevant? The budget airlines, Ryanair, AirAsia, EasyJet, Spirit, and others, are using Navitaire and these other systems that are very different.
Yeah.
So, yes, the airline industry needs better technology than it has. The question is, are they willing? Are they able to pay for it? This is really where the metal meets the rubber meets the road. If you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have sat in meetings after having presented, or sometimes been one of a couple of presenters, about the needs for new technology, the potential it represents, to airline C-suite executives and boards, and then had the CFO turn around and say, we can't afford that because it's going to cost, however many hundreds of millions of dollars to do, and we won't see a return on the investment for X years or more, and whatever, and they torpedo it. Right. And the truth is that they do that intentionally because they're more worried about share price and CapEx, capital expenses, sure, and Wall Street than the improvement of the airline. Yeah. And so what's needed is for the CEO and frankly the board to turn around and say, if we listen to you, we'd never have companies like Amazon. And the truth is also that many of these improvements can be seen in potentially a year or less, sometimes 6 months or less, depending on the nature of the technology investment being made. So yeah, absolutely, we need technology that is more contemporary, more flexible, but that does meet the same high standards of reliability that we have seen. Right. Could Amadeus do this? Could Sabre do it? Either could.
And if they don't, if they don't, then obviously there's startups and other companies that are starting to encroach. You have Duffel, you have others who are
Flyer, you have all sorts of startups and new generation companies that are, no pun intended, waiting in the wings. Yep. And are starting to make credible progress in signing up some of these companies to do this. But let's remember something. Google, which acquired ITA back in the early 2000s, ITA Software in Cambridge, Massachusetts. ITA was developing a passenger service system, a PSS, and had signed Air Canada as its launch customer. Google put that on the shelf, and they haven't looked at it, at least actively, in more than 10 years. But given the brain power and the financial prowess of a company like Google, they can't.
That would be a move if they actually decide to pick that back up off the shelf.
Well, not even if they picked it back up. What if they started fresh? What if they started new? Because what is Google? Google is all about data. They are a data company and an advertising company. And the data that they would be able to collect from, they're already collecting a lot of data through the ITA software products that they sell into the airlines, pricing systems. But the added data that Google would be able to collect if it were to start a PSS, a passenger service system, or some other airline technology, could be compelling. The question is, would Google be able to make enough money? And if they invested the proverbial dollar in airline tech, would that produce an acceptable return versus taking that dollar and investing it elsewhere? There's obviously an opportunity cost.
It's a very scary conversation for a lot in the industry, I'm sure.
Right.
So staying with tech for a second, we talk to a lot of startups who are designing software for the airlines. And over the last 18 months, even before, I think a lot of them have struggled to find product market fit and just really get any traction at all. So when you think about the startup ecosystem as it pertains to global aviation and that whole sector, what advice would you give, or what's the single most important thing you would tell a founder who is designing or working on products for airlines right now?
What I would say, and I speak with some startups as well, is before you spend too much time going down this path, try to reach out to some folks at airlines and say, look, I have this idea. I'd like to bounce it off you and see if it's relevant. Because what happens is a lot of these folks come at it from the standpoint of the technology. They don't always understand the business problem. And again, going back to what we were just talking about, the airline technology stack and the incredible complexity that exists within airline IT systems and operations. They're running hundreds, perhaps thousands of different software applications from dozens to hundreds of different vendors. So what problem are you trying to solve? What unmet need are you trying to fill? Is what you're doing tangibly better than the incumbent solutions if they exist? If nothing exists, why doesn't it exist? Has it been a lack of ideas? Is it complexity? Is it cost? Whatever it may be. But start talking with the airlines to see if they even could accommodate this, if they need it.
Is there an actual problem that you're solving, or are you just designing a piece of software because you think it serves, a small niche that might not be an actual addressable market?
Right. And whatever you do, the surest way to induce an eye roll from an airline exec, or by the way, if you're planning something for the hospitality industry, the cruise industry, rental car, whatever, is to say, my wife or my family or my girlfriend or boyfriend and I were planning a trip, and
that's how every good startup pitch starts.
Right. But that's not how you capture the attention of a business professional.
Yep. Very true. Thanks. So switching gears again, just for a second. So the holidays are upon us. It looks like, or it is the fact that airlines got through Thanksgiving without any major snafus. We got lucky with weather around the US. As we are now, getting up to the Christmas, New Year's period, do you believe that the supply and demand balance is back? Or do you still think that the capacity is just not where it needs to be? What's going to happen over this next couple of weeks?
I think that the airlines, first, I think the airline industry deserves a lot of credit for running an incredibly reliable, smooth operation during Thanksgiving. They took the steps they needed to ahead of Thanksgiving to make sure that they had aircraft and crew availability to run it. As you said, there was no really bad weather anywhere. We didn't have a lot of drama anywhere. So that's good. Now, let's hold the weather aside for Christmas, New Year's. But assuming we don't have any weather problems, I'm very confident now that the airlines will be able to do a good job at Christmas. And here's why. One, just as they did with Thanksgiving, they thinned their pre-Christmas December schedules out to ensure that they will have adequate aircraft and crew availability time for the Christmas peak, which I think this year starts somewhere around the 18th or 19th of Christmas and runs through the 2nd or 3rd of January. Second, Christmas New Year's travel is spread out over far more time. We just talked about it, roughly 2.5 week or so period of time, whereas Thanksgiving gets concentrated into 4 days. So that's good. Now, the other thing that's worked well for the airlines is that I think they've pushed the back. I'm not sure that what the stance is right now with this vaccination mandated influx. I don't think that the airlines have that hanging over them by the federal government as contractors as they once did. We know that United and Delta have done a very good job. Alaska and JetBlue have also made a lot of progress getting their employees vaccinated even ahead of this mandate being pushed back. It was pushed back to January. That gives them an extra couple of weeks. I think that American and Southwest are making some progress. with getting their employees vaccinated. So I don't think I don't think they have to worry about this mandate now looming over them, which also should be good because it means that potentially all pilots who are available to work, all flight attendants who are available to work should be able to work.
Right.
So that's good. It's very clear that there's some labor issues at airlines. I noticed, for example, on Delta this week, pilots wearing lanyards about winning a contract. Americans pilots are in contract negotiations. Those are separate issues. We'll have to see. But I think Christmas, New Year's travel should go off without a hitch. However, if we get bad weather,
well, then all bets are off.
All bets are off. And this is, again, what concerns me is, will the network operations centers be anticipating not only known but unknown weather scenarios? For example, the high winds that threw DFW off track in October that caused American schedule and operation to melt down for 3 or 4 days. Did they realize these winds were coming or not? If airlines prepare for these events, if they pre-cancel flights so that airplanes or crew are where they need to be, they should be able to recover faster.
This is a whole nother topic that we can cover next time, maybe the effects of global climate change on the aviation industry.
Yeah.
We'll leave that for another time. Okay, we're almost out of time. I just wanted to circle back to COVID. Unfortunately, didn't really want to talk too much about it, but I feel it's necessary given what we're experiencing now as an industry. So Omicron, I mean, we don't know the full impact. We just don't. It's too early. Doctors and scientists are still doing their work. They're still doing some analysis. So people can predict, but we really don't know. But in your expertise, how do you see this affecting, global travel, not just aviation, but just the global movement of people in the next quarter, say? What is?
I certainly think that it will have a more pronounced effect on international travel, in particular, U.S. long-haul travel to Europe. I think will be lower than expected over the next 2 to 4 months. I think it will keep business travel, will slow down the restart of business travel, again, particularly long-haul business travel. I think Europe has already shown that with lockdowns being reimposed in different countries, heightened travel restrictions, quarantines, et cetera, that's going to have an effect. Excuse me. Right now, the U.S. is not locking down again. We are not retreating, from backing off of reopening cities or keeping cities reopen. Mm-hmm. So I think that if anything, some of the travel that may have been planned for to take place outside North America comes back to travel within North America. So it could be good for airlines, hotels, and other companies that operate in Canada, Mexico, the US, and Caribbean. I think people are going to want to stay closer to home.
Back to where we were last spring, basically.
Right, back to where we were. I mean, again, if you're an American and you want to go to South Africa right now, you can. There's nothing stopping you. You can go and you can return.
Very true.
But would you want to? And I think people are going to be very, very cautious until we learn more about Omicron and its impact on people, even folks who are vaccinated and boosted and so on. I do believe, though, that one of the biggest impacts that will happen, and I've been interviewing travel managers, corporate travel managers, it slows down the resumption of travel, of business travel. And the other thing that's unclear right now that could affect travel is return to office, reopenings of offices. Yeah. Again, we just don't know enough yet to make any hard predictions or forecasts.
That's the only thing that we do know is that we don't know. So,
right.
All right, Henry, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure to speak with you today. I'm looking forward to your Advocate cocktail recipe tonight on Twitter. If you all don't know, make sure that you're following Henry on Twitter. You'll get a delicious recipe every Friday. And
in a vintage airline cocktail glass.
In a vintage, exactly. And this has been great. Thanks so much again.
My pleasure.
All right. Bye-bye.